Alright, let's jump right in. Today, we're talking about a word that's everywhere in the Bible, but can feel kind of confusing. That word is holiness. We're going to dive straight into the ancient laws of Leviticus to figure out what it actually meant to live a holy life. And trust me, what we find might not be what you expect.
Okay, before we go any further, you have to understand this one powerful Hebrew word, kadosh. It gets translated as holy, but what it really means is separation or to be set apart. Honestly, this isn't just a vocabulary lesson, it's the key to the whole thing. The moment you get that holiness means separation, the logic of Leviticus just starts to make sense.
So, here's our game plan. We'll start with the big call to be holy, then see how that actually worked in daily life. After that, we'll look at the most serious punishments, check out the extra strict rules for priests, and then, finally, we'll zoom out to see what the whole point of all these laws really was. Okay, let's kick things off with that foundational command, the one directive from God that really sets the stage for the entire nation of Israel. And here it is. This is the core reason, the why behind everything else. And you see, it's not just an order, it's a call to reflect a divine identity. The logic is so simple but so deep. Be holy because I am holy. This one sentence changes everything from a simple list of rules into a blueprint for mirroring God's character in the world. And this is where we see the idea of holiness get a major upgrade. You know, if you look at the earlier parts of Leviticus, holiness is a lot about personal purity, what you can and can't eat, that sort of thing. But here, the concept just explodes. It's not just about you anymore. It's about how you treat other people. Holiness is now fundamentally tied to social justice, your family, your neighbors, and especially the most vulnerable people in your community. So you have this huge idea of separation. How did that actually play out on the ground? Let's take a look at how holiness shaped everything from what you did on the farm to how things worked in the courtroom. And wow, it becomes crystal clear that for Leviticus, being holy meant building a just society. This wasn't some vague spiritual feeling, it was about real, concrete actions. The law told people to leave crops in the field for the poor, to pay their workers on time, and even stuff like not cursing a deaf person or putting a stumbling block in front of a blind person. Being set apart meant being a community that went out of its way to protect those who couldn't protect themselves.
This whole separation theme even got down to how you looked. I mean, check out this contrast. The laws against certain tattoos or hairstyles, they might seem a little weird to us, but they weren't random. They were designed to draw a clear, visible line in the sand, setting the Israelites apart from the cultures around them who used these exact same practices in their religious rituals. It was about making your identity something people could actually see.
So what about those laws that seem really out there, like not mixing different kinds of seeds or fabrics? Well, the source explains these as a kind of spiritual training. Think of them as daily, physical reminders of that core idea. Every time a farmer planted a field or someone wove a piece of cloth, they were physically practicing the act of separation, keeping things distinct and reinforcing that all-important boundary between what's holy and what isn't.
All right, now we have to turn to the most intense part of these laws, where the stakes couldn't get any higher. For some actions, breaking the rules of holiness wasn't just a slip-up, it was an offense that carried the ultimate price. And that brings up a really tough question, right? Why were these specific sins seen as so serious that they were punishable by death? Well, the text actually gives a very specific internal logic for why.
When you look at this list, you see a pattern. Each of these capital offenses was viewed as a direct assault on the community's core identity. Sacrificing a child wasn't just murder, it was seen as a complete rejection of God. Cursing your parents wasn't just being rude, it was an attack on the family structure that held everything together. These weren't considered private mistakes, they were seen as acts of corruption that could tear the holy nation apart from the inside.
So what was the big fear here? According to the text, it was basically a matter of national survival. The idea was that these specific actions didn't just hurt people, they polluted the land itself. The fear was that if these things took root, the land would become so defiled it would literally vomit out the Israelites, just like it supposedly did to the nations before them. So in a way, these laws were seen as a form of existential protection.
Okay, so if the standard was high for everybody else, you can bet it was even higher for their spiritual leaders. Let's dig into the special holiness rules that only applied to the priests.
Because the priests were serving at the very center of the sacred space, their level of separation had to be dialed up to 11. And that translated into really strict rules about their daily lives, everything from who they were allowed to mourn to who they were allowed to marry. It was all designed to keep them in an exceptional state of ritual purity to do their jobs.
But even within the priesthood,
There was a whole other level. The high priest, the one guy who could enter the Holy of Holies, was held to a standard that's almost hard to imagine. I mean, just look at this staggering difference. A regular priest could go to his own parents' funeral. The high priest, he was forbidden. It's such a powerful picture of that core principle. The closer you get to the sacred, the more intense the separation has to be.
Now, here's a passage that can be really difficult for us to read today. The law said that a priest with a physical blemish or disability couldn't officiate at the altar. The text frames this purely as a ritual requirement. The idea was that the person representing a perfect God in that specific role had to be physically perfect too. Now, it's really important to note this wasn't about social exclusion. They were still part of the community, they could still eat the holy food. But it was a very stark rule of symbolic representation.
Okay, we've gone through a lot of details, from social justice to ritual purity, so let's pull the camera back now and ask the big question. What was the ultimate point of this entire, really complex system of laws?
Well, as you can see here, it all really came down to 4 goals that were all connected. First, build a just society that takes care of its vulnerable. Second, teach a very clear sense of right and wrong. Third, forge that unique, set-apart identity. And finally, all of this was to serve a much bigger mission, to be a light, a model nation that could eventually draw other nations toward their God. And this quote really just brings it all home. The laws were never just rules for the sake of rules. They were the tools, the whole framework, given to the people so they could really know their God and live out their unique purpose on the world stage.
So we're left with this final, much bigger question to think about. Leviticus gives us this ancient blueprint for how law can shape every single corner of a community's identity, from its ethics to its appearance. And it really makes you wonder, what role does law, whether it's ancient or modern, play in forging the identity and the purpose of any community today?